The big news is President Trump's decision to release the remaining files on the JFK assassination. Today, we talk with the author of a new book entitled Through the Oswald Window to ask him for his reaction to President Trump's decision and also on his unique perspective of why Oswald, the alleged assassin, chose the window he did to shoot at the President of the United States. Trump has just announced that he is going to release the files under the Assassination Records Release Act passed by Congress some time ago. Is this good news or bad news, or who knows what they're really going to do?
Larry, I think it's mixed news. I'm skeptical because I think that there's still documents there that they don't want released, that if they were to heavily redact them right now, I think that would look very badly. And so I'm skeptical that all the documents will be released.
Even if Trump says they should, he has no control over the redaction and whether all the documents are being released. He has no check on that himself, does he?
No, he doesn't. It's up to the intelligence agencies to determine if what they still have on file is the public has a right to know, or whether it's more important for national security that they not know still at this time.
And that national security argument goes as something like the following, that if they release everything unredacted, it will reveal the methods and operations specifically of the CIA in gathering information. It would be exposing contacts and jeopardizing future national security. Now, do you find that argument reasonable?
I don't anymore. There's just been too many decades that have gone by. In the 70s, 80s, sure. But I think the biggest fear is that it might be revealed that Oswald was either a paid FBI informant, or he was a CIA-trained agent connected to the Cuba affair, or that he was a naval intelligence officer during his defection to the Soviet Union. And it would be very embarrassing if it got revealed that Oswald helped set up the assassination when he was an intelligence employee.
But what about the argument that since they still use the same methods of gathering information, the same kind of contacts and all that, if they expose the methods of operation, it is a security risk to them and to the nation?
Well, I suppose, that's an easy crutch to lean on. But I'm just not buying it. I think there's something more sinister in what the documents actually say about Oswald and his relationship to the government than methodologies. I just don't believe it all these years later that that's still relevant. Why
do you think Trump is doing this?
I think it's time. I think that, and again, I think he has he knows that he can release all the documents that he wants. But it's still up to the government agencies to determine exactly what documents are going to be released and in what condition they're going to be released. So I don't think that there's any harm in doing what he's doing. It's just a matter of, will it cut off all the conspiracy theories?
Now, some of the analysts are saying that the real information, although it may not be any bombshells, the real useful new information that could come out is Oswald's visit to Mexico before the assassination and what was going on there. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think that there's something to that. I mentioned that quite a bit in my book. I think that there was a connection between Oswald and the whole Cuba affair in the early 60s, and I think his trip to Mexico City was germane to that. And so I think the documents that may be released about Mexico City and his visits to both the Soviet embassy and the Cuban embassy could be very relevant to what we're going to find out.
So that could be adding another piece to the puzzle, the Mexican embassy visit and what went on there, if they release that kind of information.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Which is not to say that Fidel Castro was personally involved. I don't think he was. But it doesn't have to be. If Oswald was involved with the CIA and anti-Castro Cubans, and I believe organized crime, rebel elements of organized crime, then I think that's an alliance that's pretty scary in itself that I don't think the government doesn't want revealed anytime soon.
All right, Dave, your new book, Through the Oswald Window, excerpts of which I read just last night, you mentioned a very intriguing scenario and raised a very interesting question that a lot of people have bypassed, is that There were two windows on the sixth floor. Oswald supposedly, or someone pretending to be Oswald, or whoever fired the shot, the alleged shot, from the sixth-story window of the Texas Book Depository, that it was from the southeast corner. And you're saying a much better shot, clearer, more direct, would have been from the southwest corner, which remained unused by Oswald. And you say that's kind of a key to show that there's something fishy with the story.
Exactly. If you, when I was at the window, the entire floor was vacant. And after I looked through the Oswald window and I made some startling observations, I looked over to my right, and there was the southwest corner window, and I just walked over and I looked through that window as I did the so-called Oswald window, and when I looked down, I couldn't believe the difference in what I saw. There was a much more shooting time available. He wouldn't have to wait for the limousine, for instance, to clear the foliage of the tree before he could start the shooting. There was much more time between the clearing and the overpass where the car would disappear. And it was just a more intelligent shot. And so I have difficulty believing that a lone assassin, if he was by himself, would have picked the southeast corner window when he could just as easily have picked the southwest corner.
And the problem with the southeast window, for those not familiar, was the oak tree that was blocking his vision until the limousine cleared that part of it, limiting the time and the clearance for a shot.
Exactly. And what we've now discovered, thanks to the release of the full James Altkin's photograph, is that we now know the position of the president's limousine at the precise moment of the first shot. And so now you can place the limousine on the road, and you can, as I did in 1983 when I went back to Dealey Plaza, and when I went to that exact spot where the president was first hit by the non-fatal wound in his back, when I looked up from that exact location to the southeast corner window, I could not see the window because the oak tree blocked my view. And that's exactly what would have happened to the assassin.
Now, how about the growth of the tree since the assassination and since you were viewing it? Was that significant?
No, because I asked county officials, and it was a very old maple tree, or rather oak tree, even at that time. So that meant that there was very little change in foliage. What you'd have is minor change in leaf colors during the course of change of season, but the foliage itself, there was no leaves falling off the tree like crazy like we get up here in Canada, of course. So I think the images that I took from the window are very identical to that. And of course, just months prior, the House Select Committee on Assassinations was at the same window and took photos from that window, so they are very identical to what I experienced.
All right, so the big question here now is why would he choose the southeast window when the southwest window was a much better area for a sniper to kill the president?
Because, Larry, I believe he wasn't alone at all. I think that Oswald had to allow the president's car to make the turn onto Elm Street rather than shoot at the president while he's on Houston Street, so that the president could enter what I call the trap for a triangulation of crossfire that day in Dealey Plaza. In other words, the sniper on the grassy knoll also had to have access to the president as sort of an assurance that the assassination was successful.
So in other words, he had to allow the president to enter that kill zone. And if he had fired from the southwest window earlier, if he missed especially, it would have been a warning to the security to take cover, to speed away, whatever. So if he didn't hit him with that shot from the southwest window, it could have botched the entire assassination attempt. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that's probably even true from the southeast corner window. And by having the assassin, one in the Daltex Records building and one at the grassy knoll, there was a greater opportunity for a successful assassination.
Now, the grassy knoll scenario has been largely mocked by much of the mainstream media and a lot of mainstream commentators. But you're saying that you're pretty certain that there was a shot from the grassy knoll. Is that really provable with the evidence that we have at this point?
Yes, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, in fact, said that there was a sniper at the grassy knoll, but they just don't think that the sniper there hit the president. I believe that the kill shot actually came from the grassy knoll, and so I think history has changed. We now believe that there was a sniper at the grassy knoll. It's just a matter of what was the result of that one shot fired from the grassy knoll sniper.
So the fatal shot was from the grassy knoll?
I believe it was, and certainly the Zapruder film and the head movement and very other indicators are very strong. Mrs. Kennedy's reaction, climbing out onto the rear of the trunk to retrieve a piece of her husband's head. The officer, Bobby Hardis, who was at the left rear of the president's car, he was hit so strong by a spray of the president's blood and brain tissue that he was nearly knocked off his motorcycle. These are strong indications that the shot had to have come from the right front of the limousine or the grassy knoll.
Now, following the conclusion of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which concluded it probably was a conspiracy, which apparently didn't get very much coverage. It was quickly criticized, and the media really dropped the story. So a lot of Americans now are still unaware that there was a second investigation that concluded that there probably was a conspiracy. But following their conclusions, there were critics that came up with the idea that the sound analysis showed that the shot was not fired from the grassy knoll, and that the sound analysis that the committee did was really inaccurate. They had some sound expert that they presented the findings of, and supposedly the location of the shot where it was fired from was not probable.
Well, as in anything involving the Kennedy assassination, it's easy to find points and counterpoints. And since the acoustical evidence was presented, and since it was discredited by other scientists, there have been additional further tests which believe that the original acoustical evidence presented to the House Select Committee on Assassinations was in fact accurate. And so, again, you can dismiss it if you want, but I think the evidence now is pretty substantial. Not to mention the other evidence that exists. There's all kinds of evidence, eyewitnesses, ear witnesses, as well as the scientific evidence.
How about the well-known magic bullet theory, which again has been highly mocked by critics, and Cyril Wecht's role in his criticism of it has also been ridiculed. What's your take on that?
Well, I interviewed Dr. Wecht for my book.
By the way, he's the forensic pathologist who's been largely critical of the Warren Commission findings almost from day one, for those who may not be familiar with Dr. Cyril Wecht.
Yes, and I agree with Dr. Cyril Wecht that all the non-fatal wounds on President Kennedy and Governor Connolly could not have come from one bullet. I agree with him on that. There's just too many just ridiculous assumptions that have to be made, such as the bullet would have to make at least one major downward turn in midair for that to happen. It would have to pause 1 second in midair before leaving Kennedy and hitting Connolly. There was a lack of ballistic tests. Why was there never a test to match any of the fragments taken from Governor Connolly to Commission Exhibit 399, which is the magic bullet? Why did that never happen? That would prove it right there. And the tests that were done, Larry, involving Oswald's ammunition and rifle, they disprove that the single bullet theory is correct. For instance, there's a bullet that they fired into a wrist of a cadaver only. So you've got one wound instead of 7. And the wound on that test subject was severely damaged and looked very similar to what Governor Connolly experienced, and yet that one bullet was squashed completely and was distorted. In this scenario of the Warren Commission and the single bullet theory, we are asked to believe that a similar bullet went through 2 men, caused 7 wounds, broke 2 major bones, and emerged with 2.4 grains of metal missing. It just does not make sense. The one area of disagreement I have with Dr. Wecht is the nature of the front throat wound on the president. There was a small circular wound on the president, as you may know. Dr. Malcolm Perry obliterated that wound when he performed a tracheotomy to try to restore the president's breathing. And so the question is, well, was that a bullet entry wound? Was it an exit wound? Or what was it? Dr. Wecht says it was an entry wound.
Right.
I'm not buying it, because where did the bullet go? It's a soft tissue. It couldn't have stayed in the throat. There was no exit wound. There was no evidence of it going anywhere in Dealey Plaza. I believe that the front throat wound was a result of the head wound, and it drove a bullet fragment down through the cranial cavity, down through the neck, and that would account for why we can't find any metallic traces on the president's tie or his shirt when it was examined after the assassination. So there are differences between Dr. Weck and I, but I do believe the single bullet theory is correct, and Governor Connolly had to have been hit by a second shot, fired almost simultaneous to the first.
Generally,
just as he said himself there.
Generally, how do you assess Dr. Weck's credibility and accuracy?
I think he's superb. I think he's 90% bang on. He's a forensic pathologist who actually has studied the materials in the National Archives, the locked up materials, where the rest of us don't have access to that. I believe Dr. Weck is onto it, and I think that he's just got a little bit of tweaking to do to his theory, but I believe the single bullet theory is correct. And of course, without the single bullet theory, the whole assassination, one assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, just falls completely apart.
Dissenting reconstructions of the magic bullet path supposedly have shown that because of the positions of Connolly being in a jump seat, which was more towards the left of the car, of the seat that Kennedy was in, and lower, and with the twist of Connolly, that could have accounted for a straight path rather than the erratic path, which would have been impossible under the magic bullet theory.
That's correct, Larry. But there is one thing that the bullet still requires at least one turn in midair. And the reason is the bullet that entered the president in the back entered at a downward trajectory of 45 to 60 degrees. It then traveled upward at 11.5 degrees. And although the autopsy report on the president says the bullet did not even transit the body, if it did, let's give them that. The bullet then transits the body of the president at the throat, but it's traveling at an upward trajectory of 11.5 degrees. It now must travel downward, no matter where Governor Connolly is seated in front of President Kennedy. It must now travel downward in order to find Governor Connolly's back. And so there's at least one mid-turn in the air.
No matter what their positions were, no matter how he was twisting Connolly, it still would not explain for the downward trajectory when the bullet entered Kennedy in the back, and then the upward trajectory after that.
That's correct.
Okay. After all these years, and now with Trump saying that he's going to release the records, do you really believe that we're any closer to the truth, and will the full truth ever be known?
I don't think the truth will ever be known. Certainly certain aspects of the assassination. I think that this will only spur more conspiracy theories, just as the House Select Committee on Assassinations report did in 1979. I don't think this will quell much at all. I think it will. You'll see more books, you'll see more articles, you'll see people questioning. I'm very anxious to see it myself because I believe a lot of the documents pertain to Oswald and Cuba and Mexico City, and that's what I wrote about. And I think there's where the conspiracy lies.
Cynics would say people such as yourself who spent decades researching this, devoting your life to it, are shooting in the dark. And what's the purpose of it, since you yourself have just said that we're never going to know the full truth? So why are you doing this?
Because I think this was the starting point. A lot of people call it the end of the innocence. A lot of people don't realize that starting with the president's assassination, the next three presidential elections were determined by bullets as much as ballots. 64, 68, 72. A lot has happened since then, and a lot of credibility with the government has happened.
Well, explain that.
The Kennedy assassination. We have to get to the truth and start to get some credibility.
Explain what you mean by bullets rather than ballots, the next three successive elections.
Well, of course, if a lot of people believe that President Kennedy would have had an excellent chance of being reelected if he had not been assassinated. So that brings Lyndon Johnson into the White House instead of JFK. In 1968, a lot of people believe that if Bobby Kennedy had not been assassinated, that he had a good chance of reaching the White House. Instead, we have Richard Nixon. And in 1972, Richard Nixon is reelected. Once Governor Wallace is assassinated, even though he survived, it took him out of the race, and it affected the campaign. So we have three successive U.S. elections that were affected by assassination.
Where's the nation headed, considering this background?
I think the nation is headed to a good place. I'm uneasy with Donald Trump, as I'm sure many Americans are. But I think the release of documents will show that yes, there was a conspiracy, but we'll be left scratching our heads as to why was this conspiracy covered up? Like, was the Cold War really that bad that this had to be covered up? To me, the only scenario that makes it worth covering up all these years is establishing that Oswald was a government official of some kind and helped a foreign government or even the CIA and organized crime assassinate the President of the United States.
That's what I was going to ask you in wrapping up the interview is who do you think was really behind it and how much evidence do we have to support that speculation?
I think there's a lot of evidence now to support that there was an alliance to assassinate the president, a very scary alliance. We have rebel elements of the CIA, headed by E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, who were, of course, also involved in Watergate and were arrested in the Watergate affair. So we have and what I mean by rebel elements is it wasn't a CIA operation, Larry. We're talking about the Bay of Pigs invasion, where the CIA was training anti-Castro Cubans for an invasion on Cuba. It went terribly wrong, and the target went from Castro to Kennedy. And organized crime is also involved, and they were funding the Bay of Pigs operation. And the reason they were doing that is that they wanted to get back into Cuba, Havana, because they owned the casino operations. When Castro came in, took over from Batista, he took over the casino operations and booted out the organized crime. So you got Santo Trafficante of Florida, Sam Giancana of Chicago, and Carlo Marcello of Louisiana. They stood to make millions of dollars by getting back into Havana, and I think that was the alliance. The common point of the whole thing is Cuba, and that's, I think, where Oswald was involved. He was associated with people like David Ferry, who was a close associate of E. Howard Hunt, and I think Oswald and the rebel elements of CIA and organized crime were the conspirators to assassinate the president. I just don't think Oswald was any of the assassins.
All right, I've been speaking with Dave O'Brien, author of Through the Oswald Window on the Kennedy assassination and the peculiar circumstances on which window Oswald supposedly chose to fire shots at the president. Dave, thanks for being with us, and we'll be talking with you again.
My pleasure, Larry. Thank you so much.